Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. So far, we've been just a handful of weeks into Season 3 content of The War Within, and we've actually started to collect quite a decent bit of data so far throughout the season, specifically when it comes to Mythic Plus dungeons. A lot of us at the time during PTR testing were wondering which classes were going to come out towards the top. We saw a lot of Beast Mastery Hunters at the time, Retribution Paladins for a short bit, lots of Frost Death Knights for a good while, Brewmaster Monks, but everybody were wondering which classes were going to end up being the strongest at the start of the season. And it looks like we're starting to see semblances of that meta forming this few weeks in. And the meta is definitely going to continue to evolve as classes get better gear and endgame items. Some classes are going to be able to finally come online as they get some of the best gear available to truly shine when it comes to endgame progression. But for now, I did want to help highlight some of the classes that we're seeing really stand out from the rest, especially when it comes to Mythic Plus dungeons, specifically targeting classes, not necessarily specs, although there is at least two classes that are being heavily led by one spec that finds a ton of popularity right now for Mythic Plus groups. But with that, as always, if you guys want to see more data-oriented videos such as these when it comes to the overall meta, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Now, the first class I think is definitely worth highlighting is Death Knights, where for the most part they are going to be leading the pack with just one spec, unfortunately, though it doesn't mean that Unholy or Blood aren't playable this season, but it does seem like Frost Death Knights right now are leading the charge amongst DPS classes by a fairly good margin, with quite a lot of players picking them up, but also a lot of players using them in high-end content, which helps trickle down their popularity downwards as well. And I think Death Knights, for third season in a row now, it might be the best contender for all of Mythic Plus content of War Within in general. Death Knights brings so much good utility in Mythic Plus. Blizzard looks at Death Knights as like, oh, okay, this class is all about the grip capability, and that is kind of like the raid buff with the ability to pull enemies to you. However, I really think that Death Knights probably deserve some kind of a proper raid buff at some point, at least when it comes to raiding content. But while grips may not really feel like a proper raid buff in raids, it definitely feels like a huge buff to bring for Mythic Plus dungeons. I mean, there's so many trash packs and caster packs in particular in Mythic Plus where a death that can just bring a caster in and just reposition things a little bit. It's so nice, honestly. Plus, death knights have great survivability, very short cooldowns for defenses and offenses, so they don't really ever have any downtime when it comes to damage. They're always ready to go, which makes them super effective within dungeon content, whether you're fighting bosses or trash packs. Also, overall, the class has so much good utility, and it's really adaptable utility that's also very flexible and versatile, meaning Death Knights can work with any group composition. They just bring enough of the good stuff into any Mythic Plus roster that makes dungeons easier. And there's some classes out there that just make dungeons simpler, that just make dungeons a breeze. And Death Knight is one of those classes that has the tools to make every single instance easier just because you have a good functional Death Knight within that group. And this is why they definitely make the list, even though Frost is the spec that's leading the charge. Unholy, Blood, Frost all have the same utility, with right now Frost being the more popular pick, at least for this moment. Now, another class that should be making this list is going to be the class of Mage, which, very similar to Death Knight, is another class where you really have one spec right now shining ahead of it, though with mages being a triple DPS, you know, Frost, Fire, and Arcane, usually one of those three specs ends up being at the forefront. However, with a little bit of tuning, it can swing in the direction of either Fire or Frost at any moment, and this season has just begun. But for the time being, Arcane mages are leading the charge, and the reason I wanted to put Arcane mages or other mages in general on this list is because all mages have exactly the same utility, but the playstyle and the type of damage they put up between Frost, Fire, and Arcane is just a little bit different in that regard, but majority of the utility they bring for groups is roughly the same. And there's so many different comps right now out there that use a mage, especially when it comes to comps that are pushing some of the top end content so far within Season 3. They're just as versatile as a Death Knight. It can fit in any composition. They have great survivability and good utility that just about every single dungeon group can utilize. Also, very strong damage and very strong tier sets once you get your hands on those that allow them to do absurd amounts of damage, especially during their cooldowns, making sure that anytime they pop their major offensives, they're always making an impact, wiping out mobs incredibly efficiently and incredibly quickly. On top of it, mages are just generally, in my opinion, from testing them on PTR, but also playing one for a while, a very fun caster to bring in into just about every single season. And mages have always had this propensity for being really good for Mythic Plus dungeons historically, but also for War Within so far as well. So if you haven't picked up a mage, at least as an alt for this season, I think this would be a fantastic pickup so far, especially with arcane mages looking as good as they do right now. Now, another class, and this time an actual full-blown class that's definitely worth mentioning for the season so far, has been the druid. And we've seen a lot of druids so far in many different dungeons, playing many different roles out there. Even the spec that usually sees the least amount of play in endgame is actually seeing the most amount of popularity right now, outside of the trusty healer restoration, which either is really good or not that good. But we're basically seeing like the most amount of flip reverse variety of what specs of druids are good this season. Normally it's balanced druid, but it looks like this season is a little different. Druids in general, and this has just been also historically very similar to mages, have always been really good for Mythic Plus dungeons because of the wide variety of abilities that comes with just bringing a druid. From a versatility buff with Mark of the Wild, which not only increases your group's damage, but also increases their survivability. That actually ends up being really good for just a bring in one class type of a utility buff. On top of it, you have Sue to easily deal with any enemies that are enraged, and there's actually a good amount of enemies this season that can be enraged. You have Typhoon to knock enemies back, Ursus to keep them at bay, Roots to really hold them down if you really need it. You got Iterate, which can help out healer when it comes to mana during certain critical moments, a little bit of off healing with Nature's Vigil. You have Incapacitate and Roar in bear form, or potentially even Bash. Usually Roar gets a little bit more play. As a Boomkin, full-blown silence, proper interrupts as restoration, as well as feral. Generally good self-survivability in bear form, potentially some decent enough off healing, curse removal, poison removal. You also have the ability to stealth and res allies at a distance if that's what you really need, which means druids probably bring the most amount of things that are useful within a Mythic Plus dungeon, capable of altering their talents a little bit depending on the keystone, depending on the situation. Balanced druids, while not the most popular right now for Mythic Plus, are still excellent when it comes to raw AoE damage, and we may see them potentially shine at some point in the future once everybody starts to get some real end game gear, really high item level stuff for the season. But I mean, Starfall and multi-dotting things is literally one of the best AoE classes that we saw perform incredibly well in season 2. Although besides balanced druids, feral druids are also shining this season as well, as the resurgence of melee compositions has gotten much more prevalent. Being able to be part of a melee comp with a warrior buff and a brewmaster for additional physical damage has been really strong for them as well, because feral druids are basically a balanced druid when it comes to raw AoE dot damage and cleave damage, but with better funnel, and also not really target capped either, not as much as some of the other classes out there. Plus, they bring excellent, strong, powerful cooldowns while bringing the rest of the utility of that of a balanced druid. They just are part in melee rather than in ranged. But we also have a trifecta for the season: balance, feral, all very good, restoration, excellent right now as a healer, both in terms of the raw healing, but also in terms of that hybrid benefits, because they've always kind of balanced restoration druid around being a hybrid spec. As a healer, you're gonna do damage as much as possible whenever you can, and Blizzard literally gave them talents to be able to do some of this hybrid healing when you are going to be outputting more damage. But the healing that this class can do right now in Mythic Plus is excellent. It pairs really nicely with many different comps, because you can stick a restoration druid in a healing spot, arcane mage or frost death knight for DPS for utility, or go for a melee comp with warriors, rogues, hunters, and any other melee classes, which allows you to overall build up a stronger composition that will perform better in that Mythic Plus dungeon, whether you're just trying to get your weeklies out of the way and you want to just have the smoothest experience, or if you're really trying to push end game content, and restoration druids can be there just as competitive as every other healer. And I think this season might actually be one of the best seasons to pick up a druid generally, if you ever want to play one for Mythic Plus dungeons in particular. Now, another class that I think is worth highlighting, at least for the time being, is the Demon Hunter, which out of all the classes in the game right now, Demon Hunter might be the one class that's gotten the least amount of changes for the patch 11.2. It at least got some really strong tier sets for the season, for the most part. They're all kind of very plain and to some degree maybe even a little bit boring, but highly effective. Whether you're playing the Felscard or potentially the Draki Reaver build, both of the tier sets are generally pretty strong this season for Demon Hunters, which is just going to increase the effectiveness of the specs without necessarily changing up their playstyle or anything. Heavy Demon Hunters right now have excellent damage and a fairly strong control kit. They also weave in pretty nicely into a magic specific composition, so they can pair well together with Arcane Mages and Frost Death Knights, frost damage, empowering the damage further while bringing additional crowd control as part of their own kit. And then we have Vengeance Demon Hunter, which has one of the best control kits in the game. And with so many casters that are up for so many different trash packs in this season, Vengeance Demon Hunter can actually push up higher end Mythic Plus dungeons while keeping literally every mob under their control, which is super nice. Overall, based on the data, it does seem like Demon Hunters are having a fairly strong early start, at least at the beginning of the season. The question is though, will it last? And that is something that will potentially be a thing as the meta continues on over the next few weeks. Demon Hunter right now are looking kind of good, kind of competitive, but I do think out of all the classes, this one potentially could have the propensity to be shifted down a little bit in terms of their overall meta viability. However, only time will tell, but as long as Arcane Mages and Frost Mages are really good, there's a good opportunity you could pair a Demon Hunter with any of those classes in order to bolster your comp and make it even better than ever before. Though out of all the classes, surprisingly, it looks like the class of Rogue is doing gangbusters. Like, it's actually doing incredibly good at the start of the season, even though this may be the least played class in the game right now, but in the high-end content, it is absolutely slamming. Whether you play Assassination, Subtlety, or Outlaw, it really doesn't matter. Assassination is the master of funnel damage with that caustic spatter, transforming massive single target venoms into splash damage that cleaves everything around them. Subtlety also got some buffs, especially when it comes to the ability of Black Powder. Normally Subtlety plays Trickster and uses single target damage to cleave things around you, but with a buster Black Powder, you actually have some very competitive AoE damage. And the other spec, the one that's actually hard capped in AoE damage that somehow is performing well in Mythic Plus AoE content, is Outlaw. Actually, looking like a little bit more competitive than the other three specs. Definitely the least played out of the three, but reaching the highest highs out of all three available. At least right now, we'll see how the meta adjusts, but Outlaw is having a really good season, especially when it comes to putting them into a melee physical damage comps. They are performing in those comps specifically incredibly good, but being a very comp dependent spec more than anything. And what's weird about Rogues too is even though they're enjoying a really strong start at the beginning of the season, they are still statistically the least played class in terms of overall popularity within the community. Like, if Beastmaster, Hunter, and Retribution Paladin are the most played specs, Rogues, all three of them, I think would be one of the least played. They generally are the least played as a class overall though. And the weird discrepancy that I've seen between Rogues is actually the performance of this spec from like entry-level players, but also experienced players. Like, the amount of damage you can expect from Rogue and like an entry level, like, I don't know, you just starting doing Mythic Plus keys, like a +4 or +6 keystone, it's going to be wildly lower than some of the more experienced rogues that you'll be able to meet when you're pushing like +14s or 15s right now in the season. So there's quite a decent bit of a gap between entry-level players and experienced rogue players in terms of just raw performance. And this may come down to the fact that this class hasn't really been iterated on as much. A lot of classes over the past few expansions and patches even have gotten streamlined a little bit, so like newer players could have a little bit easier time getting into them, while experienced players could still maximize them, but the gap between beginner player and veteran player is not nearly as big. For rogues, it looks like that gap is fairly large right now. And this class was set to be streamlined, but I think Blizzard kind of either forgot it or delayed it until maybe midnight. So we're still waiting for that streamlining process in the future, but for the time being, maybe one of the harder classes to get into. But if you do get into one, this class is super incredibly fun to play either way. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this update, and hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like, as I would very much appreciate it. Also, do remember, this isn't the meta, and this isn't me just telling you like what classes are the best, which ones you should focus on for the season. It's just a snapshot of how classes are performing so far. However, the meta is likely going to keep shifting as we get more and more gear throughout the season. So I wouldn't quite give up on your current main just yet. If it's not like a Death Knight or a Mage or a Rogue or a Demon Hunter or a Druid, I would still keep playing and enjoying whatever you like. It's just, these are the current classes that are performing the best right now for the season. But the season has just begun. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.